Mafia 3 is the third game in the Mafia series, obviously. In this game you play as Lincoln Clay, a Vietnam War veteran who's just returned to New Bordeaux and is reuniting with his surrogate family who are part of the Black Mob. And soon things get very bad when Sal Marcano, the Don of the Marcano crime family, does some very unforgivable things which I will not spoil. And then Lincoln vows to destroy the Marcano crime family and take over New Bordeaux himself. I never played Mafia 1, I briefly played Mafia 2 but not all the way through, but I do remember playing the demo over and over again. But I was looking forward to Mafia 3 because I love open world games. They're probably my favourite type of games out there. And Mafia 3 doesn't reinvent the open world genre by any means, but it's still mostly an enjoyable game to play. There are some really good aspects to Mafia 3, one of them being the way the game tells the story through some of the cutscenes. This game is told like a documentary because we cut back to characters giving interviews to an off-screen interviewer, and they're explaining things that have just happened in the story, like you'll complete a mission or bust up a racket, then it'll cut back to a cutscene where someone's giving an interview, telling the interviewer about what's just happened and giving their thoughts on the subject. I thought that was a very unique way of telling the story. They could have easily have just done it the normal way where you just play through the game and that's that. But I like the fact that the developers went this route because it gives more believability to the story and it adds more impact to the things you do in the game. Which is great because the actual story itself I didn't find incredibly compelling. I understood Lincoln's motivation for wanting to take out Sal Marcano and the Marcano crime family, but I just didn't really find myself connecting with him that much, though I understood why he was so angry and why he wanted revenge. So the documentary way of telling this story added that level of impact and realism. You really feel like these events have actually taken place. However, the acting in this game is phenomenal. I kind of feel like acting in video games for the most part is kind of underrated sometimes, but the performances in here are really strong. The dramatic delivery of some of these actors really surprised me in the cutscenes. Mafia 3 also does a really good job of engrossing you both into the 1960s setting and the criminal underworld. The design of the open world, the way the characters talk and act, and the soundtrack all blended together to make a realistic, convincing and fun representation of the 1960s. The soundtrack especially is really good. Some recognisable hits from the 60s that are quite fun to cruise around to. And the criminal underworld is a lot of fun to delve into. You really feel like everything's connected and there's a lot of shady stuff going on behind the scenes where you wouldn't really expect criminal stuff to be happening. And working with your underbosses to take control of each district and effectively the entire city further engrosses you into the underworld and it makes you feel like a legit crime boss. Which leads me to the mission structure of Mafia 3, and the best way I can describe it is that Mafia 3 is pretty much mostly a game of side missions. The main goal in this game is to destroy all of Sal Marcano's criminal operations and take them over for yourself, leaving him with nothing left of his criminal empire and leaving him very vulnerable. So a lot of the story missions in this game involve you going to warehouses or places of business and interrogating people, killing enforcers and eventually killing the person who runs the criminal racket. To me, they kind of feel like the kind of side missions you do in other open world games, and don't get me wrong, I love side missions in open world games and I loved going to these warehouses and killing everyone inside. I just wanted to mention it in case people were expecting more proper missions with objectives and cinematic cutscenes. Don't get me wrong, those are in the game, there are quite a few, especially towards the end of the story. But most of the story missions in this game are pretty much what I've just said a second ago. You go, interrogate people, kill enforcers, and eventually take over the criminal racket for yourself. And although I liked doing these missions, it does get a little bit repetitive after a while. And even though you're going after different rackets each time, they all pretty much have the same objectives, save for one or two of them which have maybe one or two extra things to do. But now let's talk about the gameplay, and that's where the tone of this video is going to slightly change. First off, I actually like the shooting mechanics. Like I just mentioned, it's a ton of fun going into a warehouse and just killing everybody inside. And I also like going into these places stealthy where you sneak around and you do those lethal takedowns. The lethal takedowns are very satisfying in the most brutal and gruesome ways possible. But then we come to the driving, and this is where the game became consistently unenjoyable and frustrating for me personally. Most of the cars in this game oversteer to crap. I'll be driving down a road just following the little route on my GPS, then a corner comes up, and 85% of the time I turn a corner in this game, the car will swing to the other side of the road and it'll hit street lamps, pedestrians, parked cars, driving cars, buildings, all of them at once. The driving in this game was so unenjoyable for me personally, and it makes missions that involve chasing somebody or escaping enemies and police very frustrating. Speaking of the cops, oh my god, the cops. The cops in Mafia 3 are the most annoying things ever. I don't know if the developers did this to represent racism in the 1960s, but the cops in this game will chase after you and shoot at you for the most minor of crimes possible. Example, I was driving down the road and I crashed into a car because of, the crappy steering, and the cops notice me and they start chasing me and they start shooting at me. for crashing into a car. And if that wasn't enough, every time the cops chase you in this game, they always chase you in groups of like 4 and 5 cars. And they very rarely crash, they're always right behind you every single step of the way, and they shoot your tyres out, making the driving even more unplayable. Given all of that stuff, it makes them very difficult to escape. Every time the cops were alerted in this game, I just rolled my eyes and I was like, okay, I'm dead. I feel like I need to clarify that these aren't necessarily major gripes, but they did make the game unenjoyable every time they came into play, and I have to mention it because it is a review after all. Don't get me wrong, I like hard games. I like games giving me a challenge, but this stuff was just annoying for me. The other gripes I have with this game are just really small ones here and there. There were a few glitches that I encountered a few times, and sometimes some objects delay spawning in. And there's not really a lot of activities to do in the open world. There are actual side missions in the game that involve you doing little jobs for your underbosses, like you go pick up a drug shipment, or you go steal something for your boss and bring it back to their base or something. But apart from that, there's not really much else to do, and the open world feels a little bit empty in that aspect. Overall, I enjoyed playing Mafia 3 for the most part. It doesn't really break any new grounds in terms of open world games, mechanics and controls, especially the driving. But the documentary style of storytelling, the great performances by the actors in the game, and the engrossing representation of the 1960s and the criminal underworld are more than enough to keep you playing the game. If I was to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10, but since I do out of 5 ratings, a 7 out of 10 for me is equal to about a 4 out of 5, so I'm gonna give Mafia 3 a 4 out of 5. Thank you very much for watching as always, guys. Tell me in the comments below what you thought of Mafia 3, which Mafia game is your favourite one, and if you want to see more of my stuff, be sure to subscribe, and to see one of my last videos, click on one of the annotations right here.